Пані та панове, прохання займати ваші місця.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. One, two, one, two.
Олексію. Пані та панове, прохання займати.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Оце, да? Отак. Добре.
Пані та панове, прохання займати ваші місця.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Далекі узбережжя тиші беруть початок, ледве ступиш за поріг. Туди не перепурхнеш, наче птах. Ти мусиш стати і вдивлятися щоразу глибше і глибше, аж станеш неспроможним відхилити душу від дна.
Там поглядів вже жодна зелень не наситить, не повернуться вже ув'язнені очі. А ти вважав, тебе життя сховає, твоє життя, яке перетекло в глибини, і з нурту цього, щоб ти знав, немає вороття. Охоплений він таємничою красою вічності, тривати, тривати, не переривати відльотів тіням, а лише тривати, щораз ясніше і простіше, ясніше і простіше, ясніше і простіше.
Тим часом все ще поступаєшся комусь,
то вже надходить звідти.
Дверцята хатки причиняє за собою, а йдучи лагідно притишує свій крок.
Цією тишею вражаючи найглибше.
Найглибше,
Найглибше, найглибше.
найглибше.
Найглибше, найглибше.
Господи, Господи, не поминай поглядом сина
Стражденного свого, здрайця, що став на прилюту дорогу, того, кого запричислено вкрай. Господи, Господи, не поминай поглядом сина стражденного свого, здрайця, що став на прилюту дорогу, того, кого запричислено вкрай муки, де пекло валами вод,
стік собачно лямова не в тугу,
тьми, що густі виргне в нору,
що потозначити тільки могло б
марне, держись вертикально, Vasyunyk, що проривається з тебе надсадно, марне, держись вертикально, Vasyunyk, що проривається з тебе надсадно.
той, що тебе обіймує всевладно.
І відволодує зорою морок. Господи, Господи, не доведи впасти, оклякнути в порох, узятись, дай но триматись, дай но триматись, ніби човну в чорноводі води. Господи, Господи, не доведи впасти, оклякнути в порох, узятись, дай но триматись, дай но триматись, ніби човну в чорноводі води.
Я хочу подякувати Лесі і Галі Тельнюк,
I'd like to thank Olesya and Hala Telynyuk,
артисткам України, за виконання цих двох молитов.
people's artists of
Перший
Ukraine,
на
for
слова Кароля
having
Войтили,
performed these two prayers. The first one to the lyrics of our Pope John Paul II,
Це
and the
наш
second
молитовний початок.
on the verses by Vasyl Stus.
Сьогодні
This is
особливий день,
our prayer beginning.
День гідності і свободи.
Today is a special day, the day of dignity and freedom. And at the same time,
Ще одна знакова подія.
today there's one more pivotal event that we commemorate. The Kyiv Security Forum, together with the National Museum of Holodomor, today begins the Memorial Week of commemorating the victims of the Holodomor. We thank all of you for joining us for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Kyiv Security Forum, please stand up in a minute of silence to commemorate and pay homage to all those who died as a result of the genocide of 1932-33 and all those who laid down their lives for Ukraine. Thank you. We will begin our event with two video addresses, very important for us. We'll have the address by His Beatitude Sviatoslav, head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Glory to Jesus Christ. Dear friends, dear participants of today's Kyiv Security Forum, I heartily congratulate you on yet another event held by this important forum, which empowers the Ukrainian people and strengthens their ability to defend themselves, especially in the challenging circumstances of the ongoing Russian aggression. This year, our forum is taking place in the context of commemorating the 90th anniversary of a great tragedy, the Holodomor-Genocide. And it is symbolic that this event is being held by the Kyiv Security Forum jointly with the National Holodomor-Genocide Museum and its team. Together, we're not just commemorating what happened 90 years ago, we're seeking to make sure that it is remembered and prevented from happening in the future. 90 years ago, Stalin's regime used famine as a weapon for the first time. Considering the scale of that tragedy and the millions of lives that Stalin's regime destroyed on the Ukrainian land, we come to understand that it was a weapon of mass destruction, perhaps the cheapest one in the world. We also understand that this type of crime was a consequence of the destruction of a sovereign and independent Ukrainian state. Commemorating the anniversary of this tragedy as the war is going on, we see that even today the Russian invaders try to weaponize everything they can lay their hands on, including food. We're witnessing how in the occupied territories, the Russian aggressors, yet again, try to starve to death everyone who refuses to take bread from the invaders' hands. Therefore, as we are remembering the Holodomor-Genocide, thinking about security is key, in particular for this security forum. I want to wish all the participants of this event, first and foremost, courage and strength of spirit, to look into the eyes of Ukrainians who still suffer the pain caused by the Holodomor-Genocide, to have the courage to look into the eyes of our military, who are shielding our motherland from the Russian aggressor with their bodies. Modern politicians, public figures, and opinion leaders should have the courage to look into the eyes of the Ukrainian people wounded by the trauma of war, and look for ways to secure it together, to security which is sure to come with Ukraine's victory over the Russian invaders. May the Lord bless your work. May the Lord rest the souls of innocent Ukrainians starved to death 90 years ago. May the Lord give our people the fortitude to stand fast in our ongoing fight. May the Almighty bless all those who are helping Ukraine win. I wish you God's blessing and fruitful work.
А наступне звернення – це звернення Олександри Матвійчук, голови Центру
And the next address will be by Oleksandra Matviychuk, head of the Center of Civil Liberties and Peace, Nobel Peace Laureate.
Разом із Національним музеєм Голодомору за участю глав дипломатичних
This event, which is organized by the Kyiv Security Forum jointly with the National Holodomor Museum, gathering the heads of diplomatic missions, prominent public figures and scientists, symbolically marks the beginning of the memorial work dedicated to those who perished in the Holodomor-Genocide perpetrated by Moscow against Ukraine in 1932-33. I call upon Ukraine and Ukrainians across the world to join together in commemorating the 90th anniversary of the Holodomor. Our remembrance of the Holodomor serves as our national plea to the world, testifying to our Lord and Savior and to all humanity. As we walk this earth, no force can annihilate our nation. I wish to pay tribute to all those who possess the courage and strength to preserve and pass on the memory of the Kremlin's unthinkable crimes. The virtue of this truth has become our fortress. I'm grateful to every nation whose leaders, governments, parliaments, scientists and public activists have recognized the genocidal nature of the Holodomor, affirming the failure of Moscow's plan to eliminate the Ukrainian people. Having revealed and accepted the truth about the Holodomor, the world safeguarded Ukraine and stood with it. The genocide of 1932-33 stands as one of the deadliest crimes against humanity in the history of civilization. The world revived the memory of millions of innocent Ukrainians murdered by the Kremlin. But unfortunately, the world fell short of eradicating the evil that sought to obliterate and subjugate entire nations. The ongoing aggression of Russia against Ukraine is yet another manifestation of the genocidal intentions nurtured by Moscow rulers for centuries. Direct parallels can be drawn between the ongoing genocide of Ukrainians and the 1932-33 genocide. It involves the same misanthropic ideology, employing cruel and murderous methods, driven by the same anti-human goals of subjugation and destruction. Burn the harvest, rob the people of bread and any potluck, contaminate lands with mines, detonate them, and plunder swaths of land, homes, rivers, and riversides, including cultivated areas. It is the same action pattern. It is the same brutality towards all human beings. This impunity has a long tradition. While Nazi war criminals were held accountable by the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Soviet totalitarian Gulag was never convicted or punished. Hence, this evil re-emerges repeatedly, destroying 500,000 populated Grozny, Russian bombs devastating Aleppo, burning Mariupol to the ground, and human bodies lying in the streets of Bucha. The time has come to break this cycle of impunity. Unpunished, evil grows and expands, gaining strength and contaminating the entire planet, from Europe to Asia, from the Middle East to Taiwan, from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. That is why it is important for other nations to support Ukraine. This is why the leaders of the Kremlin should face trial before a special tribunal. That is why we should feel no weariness, no weakness, no despair. Ukraine is alive. Ukraine will prevail. We have faith in humanity's capability to defeat evil. We believe in our victory, because democracies must prevail in wars and restore peace to the people.
Як багато всього сказано у зверненні Олександра Матвійчук.
So much has been said in this address to break the vicious circle of impunity, of Moscow's impunity. We are alive. There is no force that can annihilate our people. These are two major messages of today's event.
To invite to the stage our distinguished speakers. Bridget Brink, the United States Ambassador, you are welcome. Michael Brodsky, the Ambassador of Israel to Ukraine, you are welcome. Martin Harris, the United Kingdom Ambassador to Ukraine. And I'm happy to invite Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum and former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Thank you. You're welcome. Today we pay our tribute to those who preserved the truth about the Holodomor-Genocide. Our special gratitude goes to President Viktor Yushchenko, who made an enormous historic contribution into the efforts of international remembrance. 17 years ago, the Parliament of Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, recognized Holodomor as a genocide against the Ukrainian nation. Since then, more than 32 nations recognized the Holodomor as a genocide of the Ukrainian people, including the European Parliament and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I wish to start our conversation with my question to Ambassador Brink. I'm really happy that you are here today with us. The United States President, the Senate, and the House have recognized the Holodomor as a genocide. Your Excellency, why do you think it is important to remember the Holodomor today? Especially today, when Moscow continues its genocidal war against Ukraine. You're welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Arseniy. It's really, and colleagues, it's very important that we're all here today, and I thank the Kyiv Security Forum and former Prime Minister for inviting us to mark this day, which is the 90th anniversary of the Holodomor. I think all of us look back at that time period and Stalin's brutal actions, where millions of Ukrainians died in this orchestrated famine, as something never to be repeated. And now we find ourselves, and as Oleksandra Matviychuk said so eloquently, with some parallels today that seem quite similar. So I just want to say a word about how today it's perhaps more important than ever that we come together to remember this terrible, terrible tragedy and orchestrated set of events, but also that we work collectively to do everything we can to prevent it from happening again. I want to just note that since Russia decided to withdraw from the Black Sea Grain Initiative last summer, what we have seen is deliberate attacks on grain, on port infrastructure, on a lifeline of food for the world. Now, the Black Sea Grain Initiative was put in place in the summer of 2022, and it was quite successful. A year of working resulted in 32 million metric tons of grain and other products going to the world. More than half of that went to food-scarce countries. When Russia withdrew from that last summer and started these attacks, it looked pretty desperate and pretty bad for Ukraine, obviously, but also for the world. And I think through the spirit and ingenuity of Ukrainians, and with support from others and very brave people taking the corridor, we have now seen over 130 ships move in and out of the Black Sea humanitarian corridor. I'm sure Martin will talk about insurance, which from the UK, which has contributed to this. The United States, and I know all of our partners, are committed to helping the Ukrainian government and businesses continue this corridor and keep it going. Now, 5 million metric tons of grain and other products since the start of this corridor just a couple months ago have now gone to the world. And we are determined not to let Russia and Vladimir Putin stop food from going to the world. And so with your question, I'm sorry to get back to it after such a long set of words, but it's vitally important that we stop, that we pause, that we recognize the horror of what happened, but that we also realize that this can happen again. And there are efforts to try to do this again, to try to use food as a weapon, not just against Ukrainians, but against the entire world. So I am very proud to be here. My Secretary of Defense was just here yesterday to affirm and show again that the United States is and will stand with Ukraine and do everything in our power to counter this terrible effort and to ensure that Ukraine can become the country that its leaders and its people want to become. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to use this opportunity and to thank you and to welcome yesterday's visit of your Defense Secretary to Ukraine. It was a remarkable gesture of support and solidarity with our country. You reminded me that Anne Applebaum recently wrote in The Atlantic. She said that Ukraine, the United States, and the European Union have achieved something remarkable. Working together, they have not only preserved the Ukrainian state, but stood up to a bully whose nihilism harms the entire world. With yesterday's visit in mind, Your Excellency, please tell the Ukrainian society, do you believe that we will win?
I believe Ukraine can and must win, must prevail, and that the United States and our partners and allies will support Ukraine to this end.
I do appreciate. And now I would like to turn my questions to Ambassador Michael Brodsky, Ambassador of Israel to Ukraine. We have a special bond between Ukraine and Israel. And you once fought like Israel, Ukraine. These are the words of our prophet, Lesya Ukrainka. Ukraine expressed its unwavering solidarity and support with Israel when it was brutally attacked by Hamas. Many Israeli citizens continue helping Ukraine against the Russian aggression. Holocaust means massive destruction or death by fire. Holodomor means murder by hunger. Your Excellency, what's your reflections on the origins and consequences of the Holodomor-Genocide? And what parallels do you find today? You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Danilo, and thank you for mentioning the terrorist assault on Israel on the 7th of October. The Holocaust you mentioned happened only a decade after the Holodomor. And Babin Yar, a place where tens of thousands of Jews were killed in a matter of just a few days, became a symbol of Holocaust in Eastern Europe. Like in the case of Holodomor, also in the case of the Holocaust, the Shoah, the Soviet regime, first the Nazis, but then the Soviet regime made all possible efforts to erase the very memory of this tragedy. And it was only after 1991, when Ukraine became an independent country, when it became possible to talk openly about these tragedies, the tragedy of Holodomor and the Holocaust. But I think it's impossible to talk about these historical events without mentioning the tragedies that our two nations are going through these days. Almost 2 years ago, Russia launched an aggression against Ukraine, which resulted in killing thousands of people, millions of refugees, and devastating implications on the human, social, and economic infrastructure of the country. On the 7th of October, just slightly more than a month and a half ago, terrorists brutally attacked Israel and killed more than 1,400 people and kidnapped more than 230 people, including women, children, and Holocaust survivors. And after the Holocaust, we said, never again. Never again the Jewish people will suffer from atrocities. Never again the Jewish people will remain unprotected. These words are very relevant to what is going on today, and these words are very relevant to the Holodomor as well. We should do our utmost to prevent happening these atrocities again. And we should say again, this should never happen again. Neither Holodomor nor the Holocaust. We should do everything we can to prevent these atrocities. We should do everything we can to remember the victims. And this is the memory of the past which gives us strength to fight the evil in the present. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And once again, on behalf of the Kyiv Security Forum, I would like to thank you very much for your participation and your contribution into the efforts to remember the Holodomor-Genocide and to support the Ukrainian nation. We do appreciate this. And now I would like to ask the United Kingdom ambassador. I'm really happy, sir, that you're here, and I'm really happy, and I congratulate you upon your mission to Kyiv. For decades, the British historians and experts have preserved the memory about the Holodomor and the Holodomor-Genocide. I still remember 2003 when, as a young Ukrainian diplomat at the United Nations Security Council, I shared the information about the Holodomor using the British sources. The United Kingdom Parliament made an important contribution in the international efforts by recognizing the Holodomor as a genocide recently. Your Excellency, my question is almost the same. Why do you think it is important to remember the Holodomor, but even more, as Oleksandra Matviychuk said, why it is important to punish the evil? What danger may the unpunished evil possess? You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Danilo. Thank you also, Arseniy, for inviting me here and for this very important event. Our Prime Minister wrote an article in Ukrainska Pravda just this month, and he said in that article, why do we remember? We remember as an impulse to action. That's the point of remembering. Of course, we are remembered to pay respect to the victims of the crimes of the past. We also remember as an impulse to action. And at this time, I'm today remembering a few people. I first of all want to remember Gareth Jones, the journalist, who was one of those, as you said, one of those British witnesses to the Holodomor. And he showed, I think he was quite crafty, as well as very courageous. So as he was taking his train into Ukraine, he got off the train 40 miles before his supposed destination so that he could give the slip to his minders and he could walk and witness the Holodomor in Ukraine and then write and tell the world what was happening in Ukraine in the 1930s. One of the very few people to do that. He was, of course, expelled from the Soviet Union for his action. And a few years later, he was killed in mysterious circumstances in Mongolia. Today, he's recognized and he received the Ukrainian Order of Merit for what he did. But the first thing the reason I remember Gareth Jones is because he tells us how important it is to be a witness to crimes and to catalogue the evidence of crimes. And that's why I'm very proud that today we're supporting the Ukrainian authorities and the Ukrainian people to catalogue the evidence of the crimes that have been committed by Russia in the course of its cruel invasion of Ukraine. And we must continue to do that. The second person I'm remembering today is a personal friend of mine, Volodya, who lives in Lviv. I think Volodya won't mind me telling you that he was born in 1942. And I've known Volodya for many years since I first studied Ukrainian in Lviv in 2003. And so Volodya, we used to walk together, that's how I learned my Ukrainian, walk our dogs together in Strysky Park. But he told me about his personal history, how his earliest memories are of his mother trying to feed her family with the meat of a dog in 1946, when there was another terrible famine, another Holodomor in southern and western Ukraine in the immediate aftermath of World War II. And as we recognize and remember today the victims of the Holodomor of 1932-1933, I think we also need to remember that this continued, that there were further horrific famines in Ukraine. And for me, the most terrible thing about this was that his mother then had to abandon him and his sister because she couldn't feed them. And so his earliest memory is actually of his mother abandoning him to the authorities in that time because she couldn't feed her children. And the pain of that is something which always stays with me. And it's a memory that reminds us that this keeps happening, that food is still being used as a weapon. And so that's why we come to the present day, because I think some people find it difficult to really conceive of a regime that would use food as a weapon. And yet that's just what we've seen. And as Bridget was saying, in that period after the end of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, Russia destroyed 280,000 tons of grain in 1 month. That's enough grain to feed 1 million people for a year. People who desperately need that grain around the world. I was in Odessa last week with our new Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, because he wanted to see how today, with the support of its partners, Ukraine is breaking the Russian blockade. And we saw the ships being filled with grain, and we saw them going out in the corridor. And I was delighted, too, that we were able to announce that British insurers are now providing insurance for ships that are using the new humanitarian corridor and getting grain to the world. So our remembrance needs to be our impulse to action. If food is being used as a weapon, that is a horror that we must not allow. We need to disarm Russia. And we need to ensure that Ukraine's grain reaches those who need it. And so that's why I think it's a huge tribute to the Ukrainian armed forces that they've had such success in the Black Sea, and why we're very committed to supporting the humanitarian corridor, and indeed in supporting Ukraine to achieve victory and to prevail against Russian aggression. Thank you.
I'm so thankful, Ambassador, for your emotional, very important remarks. We highly appreciate this. And I believe that everything you said, everything all of you said, will be continued by what was recorded by a famous historian, Professor Timothy Snyder, professor of the Yale University, who will address today us. And I would like to ask to show the video message recorded by Professor Snyder.
Your Beatitudes, Excellencies, friends, I'm grateful and honored to be asked to send along this message about the meaning of Holodomor. For me, it's essential that we remember the victims of the Holodomor as individuals, as children, women, and men whose lives were cut off in the beginning or in the middle before they should have been, each with individual purposes, each with individual trajectories about which we will never learn. And of course, it's important to remember Holodomor as directed against Ukraine and against Ukrainian culture and against a traditional Ukrainian way of life, which was largely destroyed. We have to remember the heartlessness of the measures, the policies that were directed against the peoples who lived in Soviet Ukraine, the ban on peasants from begging in the cities, the ban on inhabitants of Soviet Ukraine from going to other Soviet republics, the seizure of livestock, the enforcement of grain requisitions, the blacklists, measures which deliberately brought about the death of millions of people who did not have to die. The Holodomor is also important because it was at the origins of a certain kind of system. It was at the origins of a Stalinist system. The Holodomor, the starvation of millions of people in Soviet Ukraine, is the first and essential lie of Stalinism. The lie is that this was necessary for some greater good. And that lie becomes the basis of lying as politics, as such. It becomes the basis of the view that the suffering of some must have somehow been good for all, and therefore that any suffering can somehow be justified, that the individual does not matter, no matter how many of them there are, because we are certain of the future. How does this connect to events of today? How do these events of the 1930s help us to understand the war of the 2020s? I think in several ways. One, looking back, I find it very striking that the Russian state spent so much energy trying to deny these last 20 years the historicity, the reality of Holodomor. Again, looking back at this, what this shows is that death by hunger or hunger as a weapon was very much on the official mind of the Russian Federation. And so in that sense, it's not so surprising that hunger has been used as a weapon in this war. Or to put it more directly, it seems like denial of Holodomor was actually preparation for the use of food as a weapon. And of course, food has been used as a weapon in Ukraine. The destruction of the dam at Novokakhovka, the laying of mines on territories of Ukraine the size of other European countries, the deliberate destruction of ports, ships, grain storage facilities. All of these are about exerting pressure on Ukrainians. But because Ukraine is an exporter of food around the world, this takes on another aspect as well. As President Putin tries to demonstrate his control over Ukraine, he announces to leaders of Africa and Asia that he now is the master of food, that he now is the master of starvation, that he will decide who gets to live and who gets to die, which of course is a very direct echo of the 1930s and the policy of Stalin. A final connection is that just as the Soviet policies were based on the certainty of the future, Putin's policies are based on the certainty of the past. He's sure that there was no Ukraine, there can be no Ukraine, and therefore that anything that is done against Ukrainians must be justified. Just as Stalin and Stalinists were sure that there was one future, that there was going to be a certain kind of communism, a certain Soviet Union, and therefore that anything that was done in Ukraine was somehow justified. I think in all these ways, the events are connected. But of course, memory goes beyond politics. Memory is deserving of its own moment, and I'm very glad to be able to share this moment with you. Thank you very much.
Professor Snyder says that there is a key message which is sent by Putin to Ukraine, to the world, that there is no Ukraine, there are no Ukrainians. And by saying so, he continues the policy of Stalin. 10 years ago, Ukraine proved that there is Ukraine, there are Ukrainians, that Ukraine is a nation of dignity and freedom. And I would like to invite Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who was one of the leaders of the Revolution of Dignity, to share with us his reflections on the 19th anniversary of Holodomor-Genocide, as well as on the anniversaries of our most important dates in the modern history, Revolution of Dignity and the Orange Revolution. You're welcome.
Thank you, Danilo. Thank you, distinguished ambassadors. Thanks for coming. It's a great honor. And this is a very clear-cut sign to the Ukrainian people that you do respect Ukrainian people, that you do help Ukrainian people, that you do share all the trauma that Ukrainian people already experienced, and that you support Ukraine in our fight against the Russian-led aggression, not only with the hot air, but with the real clear-cut acts. So once again, I do appreciate your support. You just mentioned the war criminal Putin, and you said that Putin says that there is no Ukraine. Here is the thing, the problem is that it's not just a lip service. He's acting. And what Putin is doing, he is a clear-cut successor of Stalin. He is actually implementing an old policy of Stalin's Russia and Stalin's Soviet Empire. The thing is that Putin wants to annihilate Ukraine. Annihilate Ukraine as a state and annihilate Ukrainians as a nation. So it fits definitely into the legal term of genocide. Just let me remind you that the Convention of 1948 comprises 5 acts of genocide. And every single act, even including the last one, which is an illegal transmission of it's actually not a transmission, but it's an illegal criminal offense against the children. So all these 5 acts definitely says that Russia already committed an act of genocide. So first, let me commemorate those who perished, millions of Ukrainians, due to Soviet-made and Bolsheviks-made Holodomor. Those who were killed, those who fight 10 years ago at Maidan Square for our liberty and for our freedom. Look at the history. Here is the thing. The thing is that the history shows clearly that Russia, both Russian Empire, Bolsheviks Russian, USSR, and Putin's Russia, they have one common goal: to exterminate Ukraine and to resurrect something that resembles an axis of evil. And they are not the only one in this world. The axis of evil is growing. It's definitely Iran, it's North Korea, it's Russia, it's terrorist organizations like Hamas. And I'm just wondering how on earth this could happen. These kind of atrocities, this kind of massacre, like Holodomor, like Holocaust, like what Russia did in Mariupol, in Irpin, in Bucha. and whether the incumbent legal and international system is so weak that it can't prevent this. So the biggest question which is right now on our radars and which is right now on stage is whether we can prevent this and whether we can bring to justice those responsible. And the only answer which is on the table is positive. We have to do it. Otherwise, this evil will always re-emerge and will grow, as Matviychuk already said, and expand. What is needed? We need an expansion not of the evil or axis of evil. We need an expansion of the free world and democracy. And this righteous fight that is happening right now in Ukraine, this is the fight for civil rights and liberties. This is actually even more. This is the fight for the humankind. And the entire world is closely watching what would be the outcome of this righteous war. And the only outcome which is possible is the victory. Victory of the free world, victory of the humankind, victory of freedom and liberty. And in order to gain this victory, we need definitely to reshuffle and actually to upgrade the international law, starting with the ICC and then in International Criminal Court and ending with another legal institutions that have to be very efficient. How could it happen that P5 member, which is Russia, is to block a number of decisions that are aimed at protecting the basic principles of the UN Charter? And this kind of expansion, in my humble opinion, plays definitely with the NATO and EU expansion. This is the way how to protect the Ukrainian people. This is the way how to defend Ukraine. And this is the way actually how to stop the war. Going back to the global issues, I strongly believe that the free world and the democracy will prevail. And you represent the free world, and we represent the free world. As we joined our ranks, there is no force that could stop us. We will win. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe you would agree that it is particularly important that we meet today at the National Museum of the Holodomor-Genocide. It's a special place. And I would like to commend the National Museum, its team, for their efforts to share with the world the information about the truth about the Holodomor and continue their efforts. I would like to wish them to continue with their efforts to set new premises for the museum, and I'm sure that we will definitely do it in the nearest future. And I believe that the Ukrainian government will strongly support it because we fight for what we fight. We fight for our identity, we fight for our language, we fight for our freedom, we fight for our memory. And here at the Museum of Holodomor-Genocide, we feel ourselves as in the center of the fortress of remembrance. And being here, I would like to ask Your Excellencies, as we finish, as we almost conclude the first panel, to say your brief message to Ukraine and to the free world about our unity and about our future victory, because I believe that all Ukrainians have no doubt that we will win. Your Excellency, let me start with you. You're welcome. Please share with us your message addressed to Ukraine on the Dignity Day, the day of our national freedom. You're welcome.
Thank you. First of all, I congratulate the Ukrainian people on this very important day. And as I said, 2 years ago, a brutal attack against Ukraine was launched by Russia. And over this time, the Ukrainians have shown the ability to protect their country, and they've shown how important the liberty, how important the independence, and how important democracy are for them. And from this point of view, we are very similar, Israel and Ukraine, because we have paid a very high price for our independence. We are still, unfortunately, paying a very high price for protecting our country, and so does Ukraine these days. So I wish Ukraine, I wish the Ukrainian people to keep strong, to keep resilient, and to succeed in protecting their way of life, their democracy, and their freedom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellency, you're welcome.
Well, thank you, Danilo. I'm very glad that you also mentioned the Orange Revolution
Right.
in this context. Also November, 19 years ago, I was a young diplomat serving as our deputy ambassador in Kyiv at the time. And it's one of the most impressive things in my life to have witnessed the Orange Revolution and that determination for 17 days in bitter weather to stand for principles of freedom and democracy and for Ukraine's independence. And what I understood then was that Ukraine is a nation, a proud and strong nation. And so when it was my job as the director responsible for Russia and Ukraine, it was my last job before this one, to advise our ministers and our prime minister, I knew from my own experience that Putin was making a catastrophic mistake and that Ukraine would resist and that Ukraine would prevail. That was my lesson from the Orange Revolution because I had witnessed it with my own eyes. And the other message that I will always remember from the Orange Revolution is that razom nas bahato I nas nie podolati.
That's true. That's true.
And I think that's so important today because we are together. Russia is weak because Russia is alone. Ukraine is strong because Ukraine is together with its partners. And razom nas bahato I nas nie podolati. Thank you.
Bridget, you're welcome.
Well, thank you again. I think for me as well, I know today is marking this very solemn day of the 90th commemoration of the Holodomor, but also the 10th anniversary of the Revolution of Dignity. I can say also maybe from my personal experience, both outside of Ukraine, but also working in and on Ukraine, that 10 years ago and beyond, I was working in support of our administration's effort after the Revolution of Dignity. And I can say that for the United States and for those of us who choose this as a profession and devote our professional lives to our nation, but promoting the values that we share, we know from the US the value and the cost of freedom. We know that to our core. It is in our DNA. And so watching this now and knowing the course of the last 10 years plus in Ukraine, it gives me, well, it's my great honor to be here and to represent my president, my government, but also my people and my Congress. There is strong bipartisan support for Ukraine in America, and it's because this fight for freedom is also our fight. And as Secretary Austin said yesterday, what happens here doesn't just affect Ukraine. And as we see from the past, from 90 years ago, as we see from what's happening even today, what happens in Ukraine affects all of us. So it's very important, as to your question, that Ukraine prevail. And I don't think I can leave you with better words than what my president said. I was extraordinarily proud to be with my team here in Kyiv, to be here for the first presidential visit in 15 years of a US president, with President Biden's visit in February. And at that time, he said very eloquently and very succinctly, Kyiv stands strong, Kyiv stands free, and we stand with Ukraine. So thank you. Proud to be here.
Thank you, Bridget. You are absolutely right. This is in our DNA. That's true. That's true. You're welcome, Arseniy.
Well, as Madam Ambassador mentioned, that the American people, they know the price of freedom. And the same goes with the British people. They know the price of freedom during the World War II. And the same goes with the Israeli people. They know the price for their freedom and the country fighting against the terrorist Hamas. And the same goes with the Ukrainian people. A decade ago, we've been fighting against actually the Russian invasion. It was a smooth Russian invasion. And the same 19 years ago, during the Orange Revolution, Russians wanted actually to rig elections and to have their own hand-picked president. So, fight for freedom, it's a never-ending fight. We have to be in a very strong shape in order to win this fight. And there is no any place for any kind of fatigue or burnout. You know, there are different rumors that there is an ongoing fatigue in the free world, that maybe it's too difficult for Ukraine to prevail. We don't buy it. And I am completely sure that you don't buy it. The only chance and the only option we have is never give up. And this is the best recipe to win.
I thank you. Дуже дякую. На цьому ми завершуємо нашу першу розмову.
Thank you very much. And on this, we finish our first discussion. Now we're going to have a short break, and then we'll continue. We thank all the participants.
Thank you. I do appreciate. Thank you. Дуже добре. Браво.
I'm giving the floor to the head of the advisory board of the International Charity Fund of the Developmental Memorial for Victims of Holodomor, the person who has done a lot of work for us to remember the victims of Holodomor, Ivan Vasyunyk. Thank you, Danilo. Thank you, Arseniy, for today's initiative, dear ladies and gentlemen. I regard this event not only as a memory of the victims of one of the biggest humanitarian disasters in the world, but as a proof of need of understanding the essence and priorities of security policy, because security comes not where the aggressors accumulate and build up a lot of people and armaments. And this happens when there is a violation by the evil forces of human lives, and it will be ignored by the humanity, and the wars and genocides may be repeated if people forget and their crimes remain unpunished. The evil should be prosecuted. The elimination of Ukrainian nation has always been the main objective of Russia. What I'm going to tell you is maybe the classical example of the Soviet genocide and Russification, that is extermination of Ukrainian nation. This is what we heard from Raphael Lemkin in Manhattan Center about the Russian Holodomor in Ukraine. Since that time, it took 70 more years, a new genocide war of Russia against Ukraine, for people to rethink the Holodomor in the global scale. We are extremely grateful to their excellencies, ambassadors, for their countries and nations have recognized Holodomor as a genocide. For Ukrainian nation, it's not just the big symbolic acts. This is in direct meaning the millions of saved lives of Ukrainians whose fate has not been ignored by the world at this time. Almost 5 million of Ukrainians are IDPs. 5.5 or 6.5 million left the country since the beginning of the large-scale invasion. Yes, they left their homes, their destinies have been destroyed, but we, millions of Ukrainians, are still alive because the world demonstrates solidarity with us, and the world is open to us, open its hearts and homes for Ukrainians, for which we're extremely grateful. I'm not going to give you more figures in comparing the scale of crimes and victims, but before our meeting, I looked through one of the national Memory of Holodomor books and opened it on Kharkiv Oblast, Izum municipality, only those who were identified, and because, as Professor Snyder said, the traces of most of them were eliminated by Russian aggressors. 975 were killed and died of famine in 32-33. And I will remind you what Russian fascists did with Izium over the 5 months of occupation. 451 identified victims. 90 years ago, millions of our compatriots were killed. Why such a big difference? 100 years ago, Ukrainians welcoming the beginning of the new world order hoped that the world will recognize the right of our people for its own state. We know which terrible price we paid for this. Geopolitical Ukrainian lands were divided between 4 countries, and population was submitted to this so-called social engineering, which was called by Lemkin in order to eliminate Ukrainian language, Sovietization, and Russification of Ukrainians. 90 years ago, the world saw knew and quietly observed as a Russian imperialist regime was killing 25 to 30% of population. Otto Schiller, agricultural attaché at the German embassy in Moscow, 1933. Millions of Ukrainians today are living because we have our own state, which is only 33 years old. It's not ideal state with distorted institutions and serious diseases of the national organism. This state, which its citizens sometimes do not trust, but they decided to protect it anyway. And as for me, this is one of the major conclusions when we compare Holodomor and current war. We must recognize and accept the biggest value of own state as a guarantor of the protection of its citizens, as well as the sacred duty of citizens to defend theirs, to protect their state. Another issue is the refusal of the compromise with the evil. Every evil should be prosecuted. Unprosecuted evil comes back. And it's also important for us, Ukrainians, to understand the level of our own responsibility for what happened to us over these 100 years, and not waiting for the 100th anniversary of Holodomor in 10 years. We as a nation have to complete the development of Holodomor Museum. If not a decision by the President Yushchenko on restoration of historical truth about Holodomor became the state policy, this memorial part would not exist. There would be no law on Holodomor and on the recognition of it as a genocide, because we were expecting the world to recognize. And only after 17 years of restoration of our independence, the law was adopted. But unfortunately, there is no article on criminal responsibility for denying this Holodomor. And unfortunately, here in Sama, there was certain quote-unquote conflict at this museum. President Zelensky gave a very clear answer to the question whether it should be or not when he visited Canada, and Canadian government allocated funds to finish the construction of the major museum. And I should remind you that Ukrainian public appealed the government to renew the construction of the museum. We thank Prime Minister Groysman for supporting this initiative, and over these years, the point of no return has been passed. I thank Lesa, Vasyunyk, and all the team of the museum, because since 2016, Lesa is director of the museum. He's is working hard on formation of the on this development of this museum. We are also grateful to Ukrainians who support in the framework of public-private partnership the formation of the museum. And these days, by the 90th anniversary, the fund will complete the legal procedure of transferring the rights for the first completed product of the exposition, that is the art concept, which has been highly evaluated by Ukrainian and international experts. And I want to inform you that the board, supervisory board, took a decision to continue funding, together with Ukrainian donors, the development of the museum. Before this session, Danilo asked me to tell you about a dream. During the first session, I was thinking, I have a great dream, and this dream is that pretty soon the new, modern, one of the best museums of Holodomor in the world be opened, inaugurated, and I don't see any better place where in some years we must have a public international court of the crimes of communism and Russian fascism, because the evil must be prosecuted. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vasyunyk. We do pray to God that this dream comes true and this work is completed. I would like to invite for the discussion of our second panel very respectable speakers, General Director of the National Museum of Holodomor-Genocide, Ms. Lesa Hasadjuk. Anton Drobovich is with us. He's head of the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory. We also have an ambassador at large of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Ambassador Anton Koronevich. We will continue the main topic of today's meeting, the parallel between the genocide against Ukrainians of 1932-33 and the genocidal war waged by Russia against Ukraine now. This is a very complicated backdrop to our today's reality. I would like to start by asking a question and put it to Lesa. It is an honor, but probably it is also a challenge to be the head of such an institution as the Museum of Genocide. If we want to explain it to the general public in Ukraine, how would you describe and explain why Ukraine today should have it as a sacred duty to spread the memory about Holodomor and to keep it. Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of you who take part in today's Security Forum. For our museum, this is a big honor. And I'd like to thank Mr. Yatsenyuk for choosing our museum as the venue and for the topic that you chose, so that we had one more platform to recall what happened 90 years ago. Due to the state, any ethnos, or the one that has a potential, becomes a nation. A nation shares a territory, one language, understanding with identity, political and spiritual values, historical value and memory. Our state was occupied. Back then, the Ukrainian elite was exterminated, as well as the Ukrainian church. The very foundation of the Ukrainian economic foundation was destroyed. And this is a very severe lesson to us, which shows that what happens to a nation which has no state of its own and no army of its own. It is for this reason that the history of Holodomor should be something that each and every politician in Ukraine should be aware of.
І це є те пояснення, чому двері музею відкриті 7 днів на тиждень.
That is why our museum is open 7 days a week, and our team and our people rushed off their feet because they keep giving lectures, they go to meetings, and their workload is really huge.
На жаль, чому? Бо це вторгнення, бо це війна повномасштабна, так? А з іншого боку, вони активізували
Unfortunately, the full-scale invasion
і дали нам можливість
made
подивитися
it even more relevant for us to speed up our work and to make it more active, because it gave us a chance to take a look at our work from a slightly different perspective. The museum and what is going on today shows us who is our enemy. It makes it possible for us to assess our loyalty, our humanistic nature, and our weak points vis-à-vis Russia in terms of informational war, which has been going on for all the 32 years of our independence.
Повертаючись до того, що є сьогодні на порядку денному,
That is why, going back to today's agenda, we primarily speak about broadening the premises of the museum.
Так само в першу чергу подякувати президенту України Віктору Ющенку.
And with this, I'd like to thank President Yushchenko. Due to his efforts, we have this whole theme of this museum, and I would like to thank all those who made their input in the construction of the second stage of the memorial complex of Holodomor. We have a lot of visitors at the museum And among them, there are many military,
студенти військових вишів, і це навіть військові, які проходять
conscripts,
реабілітацію в
servicemen,
різних медичних закладах Києва.
cadets,
І
those who are receiving treatment and rehabilitation at different medical institutions in Kyiv. And we hear many words of gratitude from them, and this is very valuable feedback.
Завершуючи, немає іншого
By
виходу
way of
в державі,
concluding, I
як
can say that
підтримувати музей, і,
there's
власне,
no
як,
alternative for the state but to support our museum, to support the relevant research, and to help us work in further analysis of the crimes related to the Holodomor. This is the essence of the idea which we are trying to implement, to provide for the life of our nation for decades and centuries ahead. That is why this is a duty for every politician and public figure in Ukraine to defend this fortress of our memory. Thank you very much, Lesya, for having emphasized that and for doing this very difficult job. Thank you as well on behalf of the team of the museum. It is my honor now to give the floor to Anton Drabovich, my friend and a person I admire very much, because Anton is a serviceman who defends our motherland with arms in his hands. It is a great honor for us to invite you here. Thank you for coming. In one of your interviews, you said something interesting which stuck in my memory. That the Russians chose history as a pretext for this war. Is our memory a weapon against anti-human brutal war which Russia has been waging against us for more than 100 years? Definitely, our memory, the strength of our memory and common sense are becoming a weapon in our fight, and everyone who sees that we are resisting the Russian propaganda, the Russian aggression, and aggression is a very broad notion, ranging from the television all the way to the courts and to the battleground. These are the things that Winston Churchill spoke about, and this is one of the core thoughts of Boris Johnson's book about Churchill, to remember what is good and what is evil, and to remember what people can do if you fail to be vigilant. So national memory and common sense is the name of the game here. We should not engage in any delusions about us being wonderful all the time, and if we just handpick whatever we think suitable from our memory, this will make us weak. But one of the reasons why we pushed back the enemy and the whole world admired us for that, this is exactly due to our memory. I'd like to use this opportunity to thank Arseniy Yatsenyuk and the Kyiv Security Forum for including this topic of Holodomor into the contents of the Kyiv Security Forum, because it is directly related to security. The decision was really wise. Thank you for it. And I'd like to thank the team of the museum, because during the first days of the war, most of the people working here remained here to preserve the exhibits of this museum, because they knew that the museum will be threatened by Russian attacks. And it is key that they remained here, that they safeguarded the custody places, the archives, just like in Kherson, people preserved collections of the museums in safe places. It's really important, and I'd like to thank the team of the museum for that. Because we see that Russians are erecting monuments to Lenin, trying to bring back the past, and they try to hit sites like this museum. There can be many parallels with the beginning of this century and Holodomor, but today we also mark the 10th anniversary of the Revolution of Dignity and Freedom. And Holodomor is a very valuable historic lesson. When we lost the Ukrainian People's Republic in 1921, and some of our people just gave up their freedom and dignity for a piece of bread from the invaders' hands. And shortly afterwards, they had to boil the meat of their children and to eat it because the regime was starving them to death. So people had just lost their dignity and paid dearly for this. If you lose dignity and trade it for a piece of bread, be sure that you will lose dignity, and then your bread, and then your freedom and your life. So we have to preserve our republic, which is now fighting for international law and order, and many countries pleaded that they would safeguard our freedom in exchange of nuclear weapons. So we understand our responsibility, and we are duty-bound to win this war. Anton Drobovich said a very important thing. What role can famine play for human being? Spiritual famine and physical famine. I think that that was the design of Stalin and his followers like Putin and his criminal entourage. Famine provokes fear. It destroys the human nature, but it also has the ensuing radioactive effect, which catches up with the posterity. This brings us back to the causes of hunger against our people. And these people who are the next generations of those who were killed by the Holodomor sometimes give up their language, give up their identity, their culture and history. That was the purpose and good goal of Moscow.
But with the time, it was broken by the genocide. It was aimed at sowing eternal, terrible fear among Ukrainians, like permafrost. And they didn't manage this. They didn't manage this because the truth was preserved and memory was preserved. And why do we have this event at the Museum of Holodomor? The Kyiv Security Forum initiated this in order to appeal to Ukrainian authorities, to Ukrainian society, on the importance of protection of national memory, protection of Ukrainian language, protection of our national faith in the victory. This means that recently the Ombudsman for Protection of Ukrainian Language organized a special seminar on the state of implementation of the law on language. And we see many important results. There is a lot of concern in the country, and how will we protect these values? How will we protect ourselves? The topic of policy, topic of information policy, of memory policy deserves to be supported by the state, in particular by the National Defense and Security Council, because they're responsible for the safety of the country and security. And that's why the Kyiv Security Forum pays special attention to this. It's not an issue of just security, it's the existential choice. It's an issue of existential choice for our nation. That's why it is very important to have this event dedicated to the 90th anniversary of genocide, Holodomor. And in this area, a special place belongs to Ukrainian diplomats, and it is very close to my heart because they are my colleagues. And I'm happy that Anatoly Koronevich, who is representing Ukraine at the UN International Court, is present here. You are engaged into quite a difficult business at the moment. The court is trying to bring Russia to responsibility for violation of international convention. And it's an interesting fact that Holodomor was recognized as genocide by 32 countries of the world. And it is symbolic that 32 countries supported Ukraine and made their own interventions. They made their interventions in support of Ukrainian position concerning bringing Russia to responsibility for violation of the convention. This is the first step. This step should prove the lies of Russia, because lies is their essence, is the essence of their policy and culture. This is the essence of their memory policy. It is permanent lies. And today, the first answer of Ukraine is that Ukraine, together with other countries of the world, is trying, and I am sure will be able to prove the lies of Russian authorities. Anton, what parallel do you see between the genocide of 1932-33 and current genocidal war of Russia and Ukraine? Thank you very much, and I will evaluate these issues from the point of view of international law as international lawyer. And for me, it's important to see the first legal reason. And maybe people, I think people know the Raphael Lemkin's work on Soviet genocide in Ukraine. The person dedicated a lot of time to Ukraine, to Lviv in particular, and he offered this term, genocide. Definitely he believed that the actions by Russian Empire, then by the new form of the Soviet Union in 1930s, it definitely was a genocide. And Lemkin, as a person who invented this term in order to show that those atrocities committed by Nazis in 1940s in Europe had no modern comparison in the current international law, and he showed that what the Soviet authorities did to Ukrainian people was really a genocide, and today's discussion is taking place at the day of dignity and freedom. That's very important in a sense that in December this year, the 9th of December, we will have 75th anniversary of the Convention on Genocide, and in December it is 75th anniversary of the Universal Human Rights Declaration. And in both these cases, Ukraine, Lviv, represented by Lemkin, Louison, gave the world the basics for modern international law in this sense. And if we would Herschel Lauterbach on his concept of crimes against humanity, we see that this land provided these international communities very important elements on which we are based now. So if we look retrospectively at what happened then and what's happening now, we may see parallels, and we see that the objective remains the same. For them, we should not exist. We must not exist. For them, any form of our national identity is bad. And this is what they have been saying, because without us, they will not have an empire. And it's very important for us to understand that without us, they will lose a sense of existence and roots. Anton spoke about Ukrainian People's Republic. Recently, we talked to one diplomat that in these events of more than 100 years ago, our international partners see our identity and the fact that we are a nation, we are a state, and what we were then and what we are now. So it's a restoration, but not a creation of our independence. So when we speak about all these things, we understand that the objective is to eliminate us as a state, eliminate us as a nation, as a separate national group. Therefore, we need to find legal answers to these issues and legally prove all these issues. At the International Court in The Hague, I hope, will soon have a decision at the jurisdictional stage. We always say that Russian Federation manipulated the notion of genocide, a line that Ukraine committed this terrible crime against its own people, using these lies as a pretext for large-scale invasion. And it's important to prove that such manipulative blames violate the convention, and it's very important to bring to responsibility for the violation of this international convention. There are not many such important conventions which belong to the general common international law. So the fact that 32 states interfered into this case, but there were 33, but says that not only Ukraine, but international community, in particular these 32 states of the world, are interested in correct interpretation of the notion of genocide and application of the notion of genocide. And one person sitting at the TV set in Moscow cannot say that somebody is committing genocide for 7 years, then we would wage a war against them. So this is a violation of this convention, and 33 interventions is unprecedented case. International Court of the UN has never had such a case in the past. We also must remember that genocide is an international crime. And accordingly, if it's a crime, it should bring the individual responsibility. And therefore, it's important to show today that there was a special intention, in particular in the framework of national investigations. What is important that we already have convictions on mongering to genocide mongering. And then we need the second stage, the convictions for genocide, and we will work on the issue that International Criminal Court is not limited with orders against Putin and others, but issue more warrants for arrest for crimes against humanity and for crimes of genocide. So these are parts of a very big plan of struggle against Russian Federation in the legal sphere. And as we said in The Hague in September, we believe that this is a war of annihilation waged by Russia, annihilation of the state, of the people, of the nation. Thanks to Ukrainian armed forces, we exist, we may speak today, and we must do everything possible for us to have legal arguments, legal results, specific decisions by international laws, which would aim at the violations by the Russian Federation, and I think we are on the right path. I would like to wish your wonderful team all the possible success, to all diplomats who engaged into this important historical business and believe that the justice will come. I remember 2003, and I will share with this memory on the margins of our meeting. 2003, as a young diplomat working at the UN, I offered initiative to adopt a document which in 2003 commemorate the 70th anniversary of Holodomor-Genocide. This idea was supported by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Anatoly Zlenko. This idea was also actively supported by Ukraine's ambassador to UN, Valery Kuczynski. This initiative was supported by very many diplomats, and therefore the draft declaration on commemorating memory of the Holodomor victims by the 70th anniversary. This document was made public at the National General Assembly, and many countries supported it, but there was one opponent, the enemy, who at that time presented himself as a liberal diplomat who is playing with verses. That was well-known Sergei Lavrov. I remember meeting Sergei Lavrov, who, answering our initiative, took a cigarette from his mouth and said, demonstrating the image, the animal image of Russian chauvinist. Why are you doing this? Why do you need this? That was always attitude of Russia to Ukraine.
The answer to that question was given shortly afterwards in 2004, when the Ukrainian people took to the streets in the Orange Revolution. That was followed by the Revolution of Dignity. This answer is also provided in the paper of Yatsenyuk and Anton Drobovich as he fights at the front line. This answer also is resonant in the work of Anton Koronevich, all the Ukrainian military historians and diplomats who defend the very meaning and purpose of our life, and the meaning lies in the fact that Ukraine is alive and will live forever. Thank you very much for being here to commemorate our memory with a big hope for the future and with great belief for the future of Ukraine. Thank you.